Part 27, whether you like it or not. And I'm looking at the picture for this part, and Gilda's eating a steak. Listen, man, that cow talked to Applejack that one time, I remember. Oh, where did the cow end up? Where'd she go? Oh dear. These last few days have been sheer and utter hell, and I'm actually putting it nicely. These last 3 days have been spent either crying for hours or going into a zombie-like state. It was even worse when Gilda insisted she be by my side, telling me we needed to get to Canterlot. The first day, I refused to move from my bed. I lay there, crying. I threw pillows at Gilda. I begged her to leave, but even if she did, she would return less than an hour later. It was as if she didn't want me to grieve at all. The day after my sob fest, Gilda wanted to leave immediately for Canterlot, where the Wonderbolts trained and lived. But it seemed I didn't even have the energy to fly. My wings folded in on themselves, and I would free fall down to earth, only to have Gilda swoop down and save me. Next, we tried the train. We had not even made it onto the train before I threw a mini tantrum like a little filly. Every measly scent, every little thing reminded me of her, of the pony that I devoted my entire life to. I couldn't take it, and the large crowd made me almost go insane. I ran away as fast as I could, only to have Gilda on my trail. Finally, we decided to take a carriage to Canterlot. It was a private carriage Gilda herself hired, and they arrived to take us there. It was rather small, but it looked very exquisite and cozy. But even then, I was having doubts. "Come on, Dash," she barked, opening the door to the carriage, inviting me in. I hesitantly stepped toward it, only to look behind me back at Ponyville. "I don't know, maybe if I talk to her one more time." She immediately cut me off, letting out a loud and short squawk. "Dash, would you just get over it? You need to live this life. No, leave Sluttersh." Sluttershy. Oh goodness. Sluttershy behind and start a life for yourself now. I could feel her hard stare looking at me as I kept my head turned away. I was near breaking into tears again as a few escaped my eyes. I let out a shaky breath before turning around and slowly hopping into the carriage. I slid over to the other side and looked out the window, resting my head on the wall. I didn't even want to look at Ponyville disappear as my past life did with it. We had been traveling almost half the day, and the ride was completely quiet. The silence hung in the air like a heavy elephant pushing down on a trampoline. Occasionally, I could see her glance at me through my peripherals. I wish she didn't look at me sometimes. It creeped me out. I wanted to at least sleep, or pretend I was asleep. But each time I closed my eyes, I was plagued with images of Fluttershy which twisted in my stomach in a knot. When I closed my eyes, I could still feel her soft coat against mine, the way her legs draped around me when we hugged, the way she wrapped herself around me as we slept, the way her hair brushed against my muzzle. It caused a few tears to leak out of my eyes, and I attempted to wipe them away. I don't know why I would do that. I don't know why I tried to hide my sadness and tears from Gilda. She had seen me do nothing but cry these last few days. I'm surprised at how patient she has been with me. In the distance, I could see the castle growing closer and closer as we were making our way to Canterlot. The sun was setting, and I hadn't even noticed we were traveling all day. Gilda finally spoke up, cutting the silence with a knife, slowly. "So I hope you're hungry," she said, clearing her throat. "I booked us a table at the White Stallion. Place is pretty ritzy. You ever hear of it?" Of course I had. The last time the girls and I went up here, Princess Celestia bought us a meal. Fluttershy and I split the angel hair pasta. "Yeah, I heard of it," I said. "Since when can you afford that?" I craned my head slowly to her, blinking my tired and sore eyes. I was a bit shocked to see her eagle face staring back at me, her golden eyes giving off a bit of an eerie glow in the dimly lit carriage. "Since I'm the manager of the Wonderbolts, of course," she said, that same devious jack-o'-lantern smile contorting on her face. With her glowing eyes, it made her a bit intimidating. "I get 70% of the profits," she said matter-of-factly. Damn. This pissed me off a little. I didn't want most of my hard work to be given to her. Yeah, she was the manager, so what? Besides take care of the team, what did she do to earn all that? Why did she get so much of the cut? What do you use the money for? I asked. She clacked her beak and began to speak. Well, for starters, a place for you guys to stay. I book public meetings, places for you to perform, physical fitness, uniforms. She pointed out the window, and I looked out to see a billboard with the Wonderbolts on it. Advertisements. I looked down at my hooves, and the ride remained silent. The rest of the way was spent with the both of us looking out our windows. Once we arrived in Counterlot, it was just twilight out. Various fancy ponies were dolled up. They were all going out on the town. I have to admit that I may have gotten a few looks from them, but I knew I wasn't a sight for sore eyes, that's for sure. I knew my eyes had a glazed-over look, with bags under them, and my coat was pretty scruffy looking, as well as my mane. I hadn't done my best to take care of myself. Gilda immediately stood next to me, half draping her wing over me as she guided me down the street. I hope you're hungry, she said. I'm not, I stated in fact. I hadn't eaten much in the past 3 days. They were spent with me crying and drinking minimal amounts of water. Every attempt to feed myself even a little bit was met with my stomach clenching up, not allowing any more food inside of it. The knot had closed it off, and I had no appetite whatsoever. I could hear a growl rumbling in her throat. Well, too bad. You're gonna eat. You have to, she said to me. Once we arrived, we were seated at a booth, and we both looked at our menus. I only looked at mine for a minimum of 2 seconds before setting it down. Gilda looked at me out of the corner of her eye, and as she scanned hers, deciding on what to get. She then set her menu down and looked at my wings, picking one of them up with her talons, examining them. I immediately recoiled it, glaring up at her. What are you doing? I asked. She replied calmly. Examining your wings. I'm trying to figure out why you can't fly with them. You break it or something? She asked, continuing to examine them, despite the fact they were folded up. This brought my blood to a boil. You know damn well why, I hissed under my breath. She looked at me, a bit appalled, then shrugged. Well, that doesn't really explain why you can't fly physically. Just in your head. We better get you something to eat. That will make your wings work then, she stated. I slammed my hoof on the table, looking up at her. Gilda, I can't help it. When I'm under stress like this, I cannot fly. It's just how I am. You're gonna have to deal with it, I said through my teeth. She scraped her talon against the table, leaving a claw mark as she brought her beaked face down to mine. We glared at each other. I think you're the one who has to deal with it, dweeb, she said. I kept my gaze on her, listening to what she had to say. You think she's crying over you like this? You think she's regretting this decision? No. And do you know why? 'Cause she's the lowest form of dweeb. And you honestly think moping will make you feel better? You've got another thing coming. I remained silent, unsure of how to really respond. Was Gilda right? Had Fluttershy really not cared? Not even a little bit? This only made me more sad, but before I could respond, the waitress arrived. She smiled at us, levitating a pad and a pen. What can I get for you ladies? She asked a bit too cheerfully. Gilda cleared her throat, composing herself. I'll have the steak. Rare, she said.
What if somebody wants theirs well done?
We ask them politely yet firmly to leave.
Handing the waitress the menu, both her and I made a face of a bit of shock. Her order reminded us both that Gilda was very much a predator. Yeah, that's what I was saying. Where did that cow go? Okay, and what about you? She asked me. I shook my head. Nothing. I was about to hand her my menu when Gilda slammed her talon on it, keeping it on the table. She'll have the strawberry banana smoothie with a shot of wheatgrass, she told the waitress. The nice unicorn smiled and wrote down our meals before trotting off. It was silent for a few moments before I turned to her, narrowing my eyes at the griffin. Do not take my order for me. You needed something, she said, looking straight ahead. I wanted to punch her, but instead she seemed to go quiet like me, so I sat back, enjoying the silence. I looked over to Gilda and saw her give me a smile. She tried to make it seem less threatening, but that crooked grin was still there. Just try to drink the smoothie, and once you finish that, I'll take you to your room. You'll like it, I promise," she said to me. This was the nicest thing she had said to me within these last few days. I merely nodded tiredly, wanting to just go to bed now. I needed to let a cry out, but I knew I couldn't hear. Once our food arrived, the unicorn set the plate of meat down. The unicorn set the plate of meat down at Gilda. She handed me my smoothie and immediately trotted off. She didn't want to see Gilda eat the steak. I watched her animal side kick in as she was presented with the food. Her eyes got a crazy look in them as she tilted her head down back and forth. Gilda leaned down to sniff the meat before scooping it up with the bottom of her beak, like a shovel. With it in her mouth, she tilted her head back and gulped down the entire thing. I almost gagged. How could she eat that? I turned away from the grotesque scene and looked at my smoothie. It did look really good. I leaned forward to take a small sip, and even with the vicious liquid hitting my mouth, my stomach clenched up. I sighed, leaning back in the booth. Gilda draped a wing over me and took my smoothie. Taking a large sip from it. I envied her appetite at the moment. How many rude bitches am I gonna have to deal with? God damn it. You know, Dash, I know you're pretty bummed now, she said. I rolled my eyes. Bummed doesn't even come close to describing the pain I felt. But you're gonna get used to it. She took another sip before looking at me, whether you like it or not. I slowly turned my head toward her, raising an eyebrow. Was that a threat? I sighed, lowering my eyes. What choice did I have? I mean, Fluttershy obviously didn't care if I went or stayed. She hated me now. She wasn't in love with me anymore, and she never would be again. Even thinking that didn't sit well with me, as I was ready to just leave. I waited for Gilda to finish her meal, allowing myself to drift into my own thoughts of Fluttershy and I. The more I thought of the reality, the more I tried to shove it away. I couldn't accept this. I just couldn't. I would never be able to accept it. I brought my elbows to the table and rested my head on my hooves, letting my tired and cried-out eyes droop as I anticipated just leaving and plopping into a warm bed to cry myself to sleep in. Part 28. Fluttershy, please. After our dinner, Gilda paid and we exited the restaurant. I was thankful, since I was eager to plop into a nice, comfortable bed. Once outside, it was already night and the moon was out, illuminating all of Canterlot. She lifted into the air. All she needed to propel herself at least 20 feet was one powerful flap. She was amazing at flying. I flapped a few times, managing to keep afloat long enough. Maybe that smoothie helped, even if it was just a few sips. I followed her up into the sky until I finally saw it. The Wonderbolt's racetrack in the clouds. I felt my stomach drop and a smile desperately try to find my face. It was amazing. I was up close, and soon it would be my racing grounds as well. I flew up to her, and she could already see my awe. Yeah, that's it. That's where you'll be racing them for training. She smirked, flying ahead. We only flew a few more minutes before I saw a relatively large house-like structure nestled in the clouds. It was blue, and a sign near it said, Wonderbolt's Quarters. I landed on the cloud near the door of the building as Gilda used a key to open it. This is it, she said with a smile. Aren't you excited? I looked up at her, and at the risk of being rude, didn't respond. My eyes were about ready to close on themselves as tears swelled up behind them. I was ready to have my cry, and was in no mood for a tour. Gilda didn't like this reaction, and leaned in close, startling me only a bit. You ungrateful. Do you even know where you are? She cawed angrily in my face. I narrowed my eyes at her, a few stray tears making their way down my cheeks. It was too dark to notice, though. I'm exhausted, Gilda. I want to sleep, sorry. I left it at that as I slowly walked into the main common room. It had a large couch and 7 large beanbag chairs facing a giant big screen TV. Hooked up were various game systems such as the Xbox 360, Wii, and PlayStation 3. Sony, Microsoft, and Nintendo are expanding the territories they do business in, I see. I do not remember that at all. No puns this time? It seemed they had a Blu-ray and DVD player as well. The PlayStation 3 already does that, though. It already plays Blu-rays. And I'm pretty sure you can set up like a Sony remote with it that has the little face buttons on it on the PlayStation controller, you know what I mean? Whatever. As well as a large cable box. They really had it made. I wonder if there's a luxury tax on games. 70 bits? Are you for real? This is where they hang out and relax, she said, turning on the lights. How does the wiring work in a cloud? Like, isn't that how it was described? A cloud? Wait, house-like structure. Oh, so it is a building? Oh, whatever. Like, is there a generator out the back or what? Where are they? I asked curiously, following Gilda as she showed me around this room. They're sleeping. We follow a strict schedule here, she said, not looking at me. She was inspecting the room, making sure it was clean, I guess. I was still baffled by the fact that they had to be in bed by at least 9 p.m. They were adults, weren't they? But I wasn't going to question it. This is what I wanted. We walked down a hallway and into a large kitchen. It looked like an average kitchen, only way bigger. There was a counter island in the middle made of marble, and it had cupboards underneath. Around the kitchen was other cupboards that held silverware, plates, cups, and in the middle was a sink with a window facing it. This is the kitchen. You won't be in here much unless you want a snack. You can find those here, she said in a flat voice, leading me to the large walk-in cupboard. My jaw dropped at the amount of food. All of it was healthy too, but delicious. Too bad I couldn't afford this food in Ponyville. I managed to let out a whoa. I felt Gilda's large body walk up next to mine and immediately tense up. You like it, Dash? She said in her typical voice now. I could see that sinister smile again out of the corner of my eye. Help yourself whenever you're hungry, but keep in mind that if you eat too much before practice, it could all come back up, she warned. She began to walk off and I followed, assuming she'd continue the tour. She showed me more, which is the basement filled with table games like ping pong, foosball, air hockey, and another large TV. This was the main eating room upstairs again, which was a large table I'm assuming we eat our meals at. Finally, the quarters. Gilda put her talon up to her beak, signaling for me to be quiet. I nodded and followed. It was down a long but wide hallway before I got to the end of it. My room was next to Spitfire's at the end of the hallway. Gilda slowly opened my door and my jaw dropped. This was all mine? I walked in and looked around as Gilda turned on the light. I slowly trotted in. I had a queen-sized bed with cloud comforters and a small screen TV on my wall. I had a sliding glass door that led outside to my balcony, and when I walked outside I looked down at the ground. Over hundreds of feet below, I managed to smile a small smile before going back to Gilda. She pointed at a door and opened it. There's your bathroom. Comes with a shower, /bath, sink, toilet, and all that. She turned to make her leave before turning back at me. Welcome aboard. And she shut the door behind her. I stood for a few moments, all emotions drained from my body. This was it. I had actually made it onto the Wonderbolts, and tomorrow I would meet them. I should be ecstatic. Instead, I flew over to the bed and hugged my pillow, burying my face in it. That's when the tears started. I tried to control my sobs, but couldn't, and continued to wail into the pillow. I slammed my hooves down on my bed roughly. It's not fair. It's not fair. It's not fair, I sobbed. I was supposed to be sharing this with her, but instead I'm sharing this alone. I cried, hugging my pillow closely. It was already wet from the tears. Fluttershy, I sniffled. Oh, Fluttershy, where are you now? I looked out the window at the moon as the gentle breeze blew into my room, attempting to comfort me. All it did was remind me that I was alone in this big, beautiful room. I knew I couldn't take her, but the thought of knowing I would have her as my girl while I was gone would make this even greater. I continued to cry until I slipped into a deep sleep. It was dark, and I was in a forest. My wings weren't working, and as desperately as I wanted to escape the eerie winter-looking forest, I could not. The trees were not like ordinary ones. They were bare and ugly. Even in the summer, they looked almost dead and pale. I continued to run through the dark forest, and I could hear a faint voice. Rainbow Dash. My ears perked up, and I stopped running. Looking around, I knew that voice. Fluttershy? Rainbow Dash. I followed the sound of the voice, frantically sprinting. I couldn't feel my legs, and it felt like I had unlimited energy. Despite that, I would constantly trip and fall face first in the grass, which seemed dusty as my face would get dirty. In the dream even, I could feel the dust cake my nostrils and eyelids as I continued to run toward her voice. Closer and closer, I could almost feel her presence in this thick, immense forest. Finally, I stopped, and I saw her standing there at an almost weird entrance among the trees. Eerie blue light was shining behind her, and she had the biggest smile on her face. I ran up to her and threw my arms around her, and she accepted, kissing my lips passionately. I kissed her roughly and held her even tighter before releasing. I could feel tears streaming down my face now as they washed off the dust. Fluttershy, are you okay? I asked. She smiled and nodded. Yeah, Rainbow Dash. Just waiting for my boyfriend. I heard glass break in my ears as it seemed like the ground was moving her farther away from me. I tried to walk, but each step sent her a bit back, so I stood in place. Boyfriend? My heart sank, and more glass breaking entered my ears. She nodded triumphantly. Yep. Then, from behind Fluttershy, a menacing-looking changeling slowly came up behind her. It grinned deviously and threw its Swiss cheese arms around her, licking her mane disgustingly with its forged tongue. Don't you mean forked? Forked tongue? Yeah, they do have forked tongues, don't they? Now I remember. She continued to smile, but I could see in her expression it was a bit worried. His name is... I couldn't catch the name. More glass breaking in the background, and she began to fade as I moved further and further away. Because by now I was sprinting to reach her, but it only sent me further away. Boyfriend? What about me? I cried, trying to fly, but my wings had shriveled up. No escape. The changeling stood up now, hissing and roaring. She's mine now. It said in a rough, demonic-sounding voice. That is the exact opposite of what I just did. It slowly stood itself up on Fluttershy and roared angrily at her as its tongue continued to graze her mane. By now she looked like she was in pain, and I continued to run at her. My legs began to throb uncontrollably. I had no choice but to stop and rest as I watched on in horror as the changeling practically molested her. She shut her eyes tightly, refusing to look at me. The tears continued to fall, and I tried to call her name. I tried to get her attention, but failed. All I did was shout and scream her name, hoping by some miracle she'd hear me, but no such luck. Fluttershy, please! Finally words came out as she gave one last look at me. She opened her mouth to speak, but before she could, the changeling came right up to my face and opened its mouth, ready to devour me. I threw my hooves over my face before it could attack, and suddenly felt myself jolt awake. I lay in the bed before sitting up and panting heavily. The moon shone perfectly through my window, symbolizing it was very early in the morning. My eyes were swollen, and I could see my sheets were almost soaked with my sweat and my pillow soaked with tears. After recovering from the night terror, I slowly put my hooves on my face and sighed into them. I fell back on my pillow and looked up at my ceiling fan as it spun around slowly, before forcing myself to go back to sleep. It would be a few hours before I could close my eyes without seeing that horrible changeling practically eat Fluttershy. Part 29. We tend not to question Gilda's methods. There's a disclaimer here that says, "Sorry it's taken so long, every pony." I'm not too proud of this. A lot of emotional stress has been happening and my computer has been messing up. Plus my job has been getting in the way. Please understand. I hope you all enjoy. Oh, man, I don't even remember like where I left off. I think it's in the next part that I left off, and I'll continue what I just said next part when I'm logged in, because apparently I have to log in to see the art for this story, which I already have everything downloaded, so whatever. It was about 4 in the morning when I heard a loud screeching throughout the hallway. "Up and at 'em, Bolts. It's time to get up." The griffin's voice shrieked, letting us all know it was time to wake up. I groaned and sat up, immediately wincing. My head was throbbing and my eyes were sore as well. I slowly craned my head towards the window. The sun wasn't even up yet. I wanted to just sleep again, but I knew that I had to start moving eventually. I heard a soft knock on my door. "Hello?" A voice called. It was different, not like Gilda's. My ears perked up instantly. I knew exactly who it was, and it jolted me awake. Oh my Celestia. Spitfire? I managed to choke out at her. I began to scramble out of bed. Despite how terrible my body felt, the adrenaline sort of eased the pain as my heart pounded in my ears. Spitfire was actually talking to me. "I'll be out in a minute." I could hear her giggle as a few other hoof steps outside could be heard. "All right, meet us outside on the back cloud track, all right? Take your time," she assured me. I most certainly would not. This was Spitfire. I was actually going to train with Spitfire and the Wonderbolts. Once I heard the other hoofsteps sort of fade out, the adrenaline rush subsided, and I felt a surge of pain engulf my entire body. My eyes were swollen and sore from the night of crying, and my throat was scratchy from the sobbing as well. My mane was probably a mess, and my head was pounding. The headache was the worst. It was like a night of partying without the fun and booze. With each heartbeat, it throbbed in my ears and in my temples, reminding me of the crying I had just done a few hours earlier. I groaned before opening the door to the empty hallway. The other ponies must already be outside. I swallowed hard and tried to walk my best outside to where they were. The back cloud track, as Spitfire said. I assumed it was out the back door. Once I found the track, Gilda was doing something to the bolts, but it was a bit too dark, and I was too tired to figure out what it was. I squinted my eyes to see it better, but increased my pace a bit to figure it all out. Once I was close enough, my eyes widened a bit. I realized Gilda was tying a rope around their waist. I gasped and turned to her. Even as the sun was peeking over the clouds, ever so slightly, her eyes gave off that eerie yellow glow. "Gilda, what in Celestia's name are you doing?" I asked in a somewhat weak voice. I cleared my throat, however, ready to sound a bit more aggressive when I talked. She clacked her beak and leaned closer. Dash, you're late," she said simply, taking a rope in her talons and walking over to me. I was too stunned to move when I realized what she was doing. Before I knew it, a rope was tied around my torso, holding my wings down. She backed away, smiling at her work. "Cool your jets, Dash. You have no room to question my managing," she said simply as the bolts all lined up, waiting for Gilda's instructions. I grumbled and stood with them, waiting to hear what she'd say. "Okay, Bolts, obviously you all know what's going on, but since our friend Rainbow Dash is new, we should give her a rundown," she said, pacing up and down the line, looking at me intently. I lowered my eyes at her. "Now, in the mornings like this, I want you guys to get your leg strength up, because not only do you need your legs to help you run to take off, but you need strong legs to help you land." Gilda walked over and lifted up Spitfire's front leg, revealing how well-toned she was. I swallowed hard. Even I wasn't that toned and athletic. Maybe this would be hard to keep up. Spitfire nodded, helping Gilda speak. "That's right, Bolts," Spitfire said. "Landing in a split second after flying 200 miles per hour can hurt. Luckily, our legs are trained for that." They all nodded, except for me. I merely felt fear wash over me like a cold wave splashing on the shore. Gilda nodded. "Okay, any questions?" she asked, again, looking right at me. The others looked at me as well, and I felt all attention on me. Although this felt like condescending attention. Negative attention. Rainbow does not like that. I merely shook my head. "No, let's get going," I said to them. Gilda nodded. "I agree. Go on, Bolts," she barked. And with that, the Wonderbolts were trotting at a quick pace around the track, and I followed soon after. Surprisingly, my thoughts were not on Fluttershy now. Maybe it was because I was working out, trying to impress my heroes. I was still awestruck. I was with the Wonderbolts, finally, like I was dreaming. I saw Spitfire slow her pace, and my stomach flood with butterflies. Oh my Celestia, she was actually coming to talk to me. I felt a smile try to force its way on my face, but it was as if my mouth forgot how to. She turned to me and smiled, the morning sun slowly peeking over the clouds. "Hey, newbie," she said. "I think I know you. I've seen you a few times, correct?" she asked, keeping a medium pace with me. I was merely awestruck, but I nodded. "Yeah, I'm Rainbow Dash," I managed to mutter. She rolled her eyes with a smile and giggle snorted. "Well, I knew that, silly," she remarked. I couldn't help but find myself wanting to laugh with her, but it was still early, and I was still recovering from last night. "Is the rope really necessary?" I asked with skepticism in my voice. She was silent for a moment, but closed her eyes and smiled, almost like a shrug. She's been doing this since she first signed on as her manager. It seems to be working. It helps suppress my urge to fly and builds leg strength," she tried to convince me. I looked forward, still not convinced. She could sense my silence as a sign of not really buying into that, but she kept her nonchalant face and attitude. "We tend not to question Gilda's methods," she said finally. I was curious as to why. Were they afraid of her? Was she too strict on them and her methods a bit extreme? Or was she genuinely a good manager? She seemed like she was pretty serious when it came to training, and the bolts seemed to go along with it okay. I kept it at that and continued to run, ignoring the throbbing in my head and eyes. "By the way," Spitfire continued, "I had a hard time sleeping last night." I felt my stomach churn at that. Oh great, did she hear me? I bit my bottom lip. "Oh?" I asked. "Yeah, I heard some pony crying," she said, a bit casual, as if it was nothing. "Would you know anything about that?" she asked. I could tell that she knew it was from me. I knew she knew it was from me, but I denied it, knowing very well I was lying to her. "No, I didn't hear anything last night," I said nervously. I was an awful liar. She let the silence set between our conversation for a bit before nodding. Okay," she said, smiling. "But if you figure out what's going on with it, come tell me, alright?" she asked, grinning. Was she implying that I could tell her everything? There was no way. I just met her, and it is the first time meeting her where she acknowledged me. My mouth gaped open a bit before I spoke up. Okay, I'll try," I assured her. She nodded. "No problem. Welcome to the team." And with that, she galloped off ahead of me. I hadn't realized how fast she was. I was beginning to feel out of breath. How long have we been running? I tried to keep pace with the others, but could feel myself falling behind a bit. I panted, trying to keep up. The lack of food wasn't helping much either, but the sooner I finished this, the sooner we'd be done. I grit my teeth and hammered down on the clouds, trotting and galloping as fast as I could to the finish line on the last lap. Once I arrived, the other bolts were already getting water and doing cool-down stretches and exercises. Gilda walked over to me, yanking the rope off. It burnt my skin a bit, but it was nothing I couldn't handle. "Get some water and rest up. When you're done, it's breakfast," she said, and then walked away. I felt relieved as I felt the cold water splash down my throat. I was actually hungry from the workout, and I knew no matter how full I thought I was, I had to keep eating, because I never wanted to feel like I'm falling behind with their workouts. I want to be the best. Then it hit me like a ton of bricks. I had to be the best Wonderbolt. The best. Maybe, just maybe, if I'm the best, Fluttershy will surely notice. Yeah, I couldn't help but feel all the negative emotions wash away, if only for a second. I had this new hope instilled in me. If I was going to win Fluttershy back, I needed to be new, I needed to be improved, and most of all, I needed to be the best. Because she deserved the best, then I felt my thoughts drift to her again. And my mood dipped as well. I sighed and my head began to slowly fall forward, as if there were weights weighing it down. Oh, Fluttershy, where were you now? Did you miss me like I missed you? I felt myself slowly being dragged to the ground, like gravity increased. I wanted to curl up in a ball when I thought of her. When I thought of us, I felt my eyes slowly close as I fought back tears before those familiar talons were near my face, and Gilda leaned down, whispering in my ear, "Dash, not good to lay down after a workout." And when she said that, I could feel her beak slowly lean over to nibble on my ear. I flinched immediately and scrambled backwards. I gave her a disgusted look and narrowed my eyes at her. "I knew it, I knew it, I knew it." "Do not do that again," I warned her. Gilda merely giggled playfully and slowly turned away. "Whatever you say, Dash," she shrugged. "Okay, Bolts, let's head inside for breakfast," she said. I heard them all gasp with delight and follow her. I'm sure they were all starving. Despite having virtually nothing in my stomach, I was stuffed. Hopefully I could force myself to eat something at breakfast. Part 30. To bully. And as I was saying last part, this might be around where I left off, but I don't know. I slapped the account, Bread-Crumbz account, into Gallery DL and downloaded everything that they posted, which is just the pictures, none of the descriptions or text or anything, which I should probably do something about that. But I have the picture that's that you have to sign in order to see, and there's nothing to it, really. I don't know, maybe it's just kind of the context of the part of the story, but whatever, that's the next part after this one. But you can still read the text just fine. I mean, that's weird. After the morning practice, each of the bolts went up to their assigned rooms while breakfast was prepared by our dietitians. Nutrition was one of the things they did perfectly for the Wonderbolts. Our meals were planned, prepared, and served according to each of our heights and physical fitness. Since I was new, I figured my breakfast would be pretty routine like theirs. Hopefully. In my room, I walked over to the bathroom and looked at myself in the mirror. I looked like a wreck. My eyes looked dull, as did my once bright rainbow mane. Maybe it was the lighting, but it seemed my color had drained ever so slightly. But after the past week I had, I can't imagine why my color would be bright. I turned the water on in the sink and splashed my face with ice-cold water. It felt good after the workout I had just experienced. Hopefully tonight I'd shower if I wasn't too tired. It was still hard to believe I was actually here. It was hard to believe I was actually part of the Wonderbolts, and I was living my dream. So why did it feel so empty? I shoved that thought aside immediately. I knew exactly why it felt so empty. I shut my eyes tightly, feeling the tears begin to try to claw their way out from behind my eyelids. "I'm not gonna cry, not right now," I told myself. I continued to splash my face with the cold water to maybe equal out the hot tears that were already making their escape. After about 20 times, I gave up and dried myself off, making my way to the kitchen for breakfast. Again, it seemed as though I was late to everything. The other bolts were already sitting at a table, sipping on what looked like wheatgrass juice. I cringed. Despite being a pony, I hated wheatgrass. Gilda turned around when she saw me enter. "Ah, Dash, glad you can make it. Listen, since you're new, you're going to be helping us prepare breakfast." I noticed how she was sitting down as well with the bolts. So when she said us, she meant myself and the cook. Yeah, I remember this now. She was an older-looking Pegasus whose wings and legs looked absolutely ripped. Maybe she was a Wonderbolt in her younger days? She prepared the breakfast, and she seemed intensely focused on her work, frying eggs in one pan and flipping vegetables in another. I was stunned at how much work this one pony could do. I walked over to her, and she turned to me. Her grayish-pink coat seemed worn and covered in sweat, as her bluish-green mane seemed to be all over the place. She was wearing a hairnet and smiled. "Hey, hun, gonna need help flipping those eggs, okay?" she asked. Her warm golden eyes glimmered in the dimly lit kitchen. I nodded. "I can try," I chimed up. Immediately she patted me on the back, aggression in her voice. "Don't try. Do. You can do it," she barked at me. "I'm Cloudy, by the way," she said to me. I smiled at her and nodded. "Okay, I'm Rainbow Dash," I said to her, but after our introductions, she went back to cooking her food. She intently flipped the vegetables in the pan with just her mouth on the handle, and I only managed to flip the eggs around with a spatula. I was hoping I wouldn't have this duty again. Cooking for the Bolts was a lot of hard work. I wonder how Cloudy was able to do it all on her own. Cloudy seemed like a pony I really wanted to get to know. Something about her made her seem inviting. However, it seemed like conversation in the kitchen with Cloudy was near impossible. It was as if she was the only one in here. After breakfast was made, Cloudy and I began to serve each of the Bolts. A spoonful of scrambled eggs, plenty of sliced fruit, a tall glass of water, and a shot of wheatgrass for each of us, which I knew I'd neglect to drink. I went to take my seat before Gilda stood up before the table, standing next to me. Oh great, what did she have in store? The Bolts gently hit their hooves against the table in a mock applause as Gilda took the stage, so to speak. "Good morning, Bolts," she said in a casual voice, that same crooked smile on her face. "Good morning, Gilda," they all shouted, which caused me to jump a little. I should be pumped. They were obviously going to welcome me into the Wonderbolts. I forced myself to smile. It was fake, but a smile nonetheless. "I think we all know why I'm doing this," she said in a soft voice. "To welcome Rainbow Dash into the family. She's been wanting to join her entire life, and I'm so glad I'm giving her the opportunity to finally live her dream." The Bolts did their applause thing again, hitting their hooves on the table, when Soren accidentally hit his hoof a little too hard, sending his wheatgrass glass to topple over, spilling the contents. "Aw, my bad," he said with a shrug. "No use no use crying over spilled grass, right guys?" he asked them, and the Bolts began to chuckle and giggle at Soren's remark. Even I began to crack a small smile. Sure, it wasn't a laugh, but it was a smile. I laughed at how close they were, and that soon I would also be a part of this family. However, our moment was cut short when a loud screech was heard, cutting us all off. I flinched immediately and slowly craned my head to the griffin standing next to me. "Soren, you motherfucking moron! Do you have any fucking idea how much that wheatgrass fucking is?" She cawed at him angrily. Soren lowered his head and ears shamefully. "Sorry, boss," he muttered. The others in the table quietly lowered their heads as well and nodded, silently apologizing. She clacked her beak in aggravation. "Now who's gonna clean this up?" she barked. I slowly turned my head away from her. This is who was managing the Wonderbolts? This is who they were afraid of? This was who is actually in charge? Gilda doesn't know how to lead, only to scare, to bully. I narrowed my eyes, angrily staring at her from my peripherals. Was this how things have always been before she came to be? This couldn't be right. This couldn't be how the Wonderbolts ran. All this silence and attendance. This wasn't the military, but it was beginning to feel like it. Soren shyly raised his hoof. I can do it, boss," he mumbled. She threw her talon in the air, curling it into a claw-like position. "Good! Get to it, Soren!" And with that, she sat back at her spot in the table, devouring her steak and eggs. Soren sheepishly stood up from the table and rushed to get a paper towel, and instinctively I went after him and grabbed some myself. As I went to grab some, I smiled at him. I wanted to let him know since we were a family, I would help him, but his face only registered more fear as he subtly shook his head. My smile shrank a bit, and I tilted my head in confusion. "If you made the mess, you clean it yourself," said Gilda, not looking away from her meal. Only her golden eyes blinked over at me. "Since you're new, I'll give you a warning since you aren't accustomed to these rules. But every pony who makes a mess has to clean it themselves." She looked over to Soren now. "Every pony." Soren nodded meekly and went over to his spill to wipe it up quickly. The other Bolts silently nibbled on their food. I stood there, simply amazed and perplexed that they were being suppressed, it seemed, by Gilda. She was trying to push down the happiness they felt around each other, like she was their mother or something. This had to stop. This wasn't going to keep happening. Not while I'm part of the Wonderbolts. Part 31. It was just lust. I had a few successful dates with Red Robin, although I would never dream of calling them that out loud, even in my head. There's no way he wanted to date me. He was just me, Fluttershy. Nothing special. He could have any pony he wanted, so why come for me? Yeah, then I'm pretty sure that was the last part I remember. The previous part. Because I remember the cook, and that's about it. I don't think I remember this part at all. So, the whole thing was confusing. I wanted to be with him. There was no doubt about that. I knew he had the charm, confidence, and good looks Rainbow Dash had, but with a stallion. He was like Rainbow Dash incarnated into a male. He even had the same smirk she did, which made my heart twist with hope and guilt at the same time. Was Rainbow smirking now? Was she happy where she was? My heart wanted so desperately for her to be happy, but at the same time I wanted to be happy too. I tried to keep Rainbow Dash out of every conversation I had with all of my friends. Whenever they'd ask, I'd shrug and say she was probably happy wherever she was. They never bought that excuse, and I could feel them judging me when I would shrug off our friend. But I was not going to let them know I was wrong for what I did. It was the right decision, and they had to learn to live with it like I did. It's not like they were in the relationship with us. Red Robin hung around Ponyville for a bit, basking in the fame he was getting in such a small town. No pony has ever seen some pony so famous before besides Celestia and Luna themselves. Red Robin made sure to keep me next to him, despite my shyness and discomfort in large crowds. It was almost as if he was trying to establish we were a couple, which was silly. Even if we did do couple things like go out on dates, we never kissed or hugged or held wings. I hope he knew I was far too shy to make the first move with him, and it seemed he didn't mind at all as he made no attempt to kiss me or hug me whatsoever. There was one thing we would do together, though, something I am so ashamed of, but love at the same time. Something I never thought I'd be doing this time last year. Oh dear. Rainbow Dash is getting into hard, it seems. I had no idea what had come over me that night. We were riding in a personal carriage after the date as he was taking me home. We talked and laughed and had fake conversations, but there was something I wanted. I had thought about it the whole night, and I knew I wanted it. I never imagined I'd want something like this, but I did. I didn't let him know or even hint to what it was. I just continued to laugh and joke and be a cute little mare like I knew I was. But I think after a while he saw it too. He saw what I wanted, and that is when he moved closer and just began to touch me. In places I had not allowed Rainbow to touch me in months. At first I was taken aback. I gasped and pushed his hoof away, shaking my head, but I could see a smug smile in the dark carriage as he leaned in closer to me. Come on, Fluttershy. I saw the way you were looking at me in there. Why bother wasting time and just get right to it? And after that, without any consent from me, he began to touch me again. I leaned back into the seat, and although I didn't necessarily know if I still wanted this, I did not stop him. Before I knew it, one thing led to another, and he had gone all the way with me in the back of that carriage. It had been so long since I felt a male inside me, and it felt so good. So positively good, and at the same time it felt dirty, like I had done something wrong. But what could be wrong? This is what I wanted, right? I wanted to be my own pony again, and I wanted the touch of a stallion. Sure, Rainbow Dash was an excellent lover, but nothing compared to the strong hooves of a stallion. As it went on, however, Red Robin grew more aggressive. Maybe it was because I wasn't used to a stallion, or maybe it was because I wasn't entirely aware the entire time. It felt almost like a dream, and then, halfway through, something changed. Goodness gracious. Yeah, I don't remember that at all. So this is new territory for me. Oh dear. The more into it he got, the dirtier I felt. Despite all my efforts, my rainbow-maned lover would pop into my head. Her face was all I could see. All I could think of was what Rainbow Dash was doing. Was she okay? What had she ever found out about this? Wouldn't she be crushed? I knew I would have been crushed if I didn't already expect her to be doing that with another pony. As dirty as I felt during it, I'm glad it all happened because it was at the final moments of what we had done that really made me realize that this stallion was nothing like Rainbow Dash for his heart did not have the same purity she did. When he had finally finished up, he collapsed on top of me in a sweaty, heavy breathing heap. I had gotten off too, but it didn't feel right. Not by a long shot, because at this point, tears were streaming down my face. There was no passion, there was no love. It was just lust. He lifted himself up and gave me one last hug. I turned away, attempting to hide my tears. There was no way he could see them in the dark anyway. After that quick hug, he looked out the window as the carriage continued to move down the dark dirt roads of Ponyville. I sat there, hugging my stomach. What in Equestria was wrong with me? Why did I enjoy this so much? What is wrong with you, Fluttershy? I'd ask myself. What dirty mare would enjoy this? Maybe I was dirty. Too dirty for Rainbow Dash. I don't deserve a mare like her. I never deserved a mare like her. When the carriage arrived at my house, he gave me one last goodbye as I hopped out. Before I went into the house, he turned to me, handing me a small card. I picked it up with my mouth, and when the card was out of his mouth, he began to explain. My address in Camelot, he said. Write to me whenever you want, and when you want to visit me. Let me know and I will send for some pony to get you. And with that, he sat back in his carriage and drove off. I watched him leave before I would allow more tears to fall from my eyes. I walked slowly into my cottage, where all the animals were asleep, nestled in their little beds. If only I could be a tiny animal where life was so simple. No broken hearts, no regret, no nothing. I walked over to a light and turned it on. The small light lit up the room as I plopped myself on the couch, resting my head on a pillow. I wanted to cry more, but the tears just stopped. I sighed and rolled over, facing the end of the couch. I tried to fight sleep as I allowed myself to think and let sink in what was happening to me. 1. Rainbow Dash and I were officially broken up. That was a fact. 2. She hated me. She undoubtedly hated my guts. And after what I did tonight, she would hate me even more. 3. Red Robin was a selfish, controlling, narcissistic, lustful pony, but I absolutely loved that about him. 4. I was dirty for loving it, and that... 4. I was dirty for loving it, and that made everything about me dirty. And finally, 5. I would have to completely force myself to eradicate any feelings I have for Rainbow Dash, no matter how small they are.